The Chicago Blackhawks sadly didn't win the Macklin Celebrini sweepstakes, but they still landed the second overall pick in the draft. And on today's episode, I'll go over all of their best options and Lukas Reichel signing a 2-year contract extension.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman2. Make sure also to go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, just a reminder to everyone watching this on YouTube, whether you're a longtime watcher of the show or if you're someone who's tuning into the show for the first time, please make sure to hit that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. All that stuff really does help me out tremendously in growing the show. If you're tuning in through an audio platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be, please make sure you're downloading all of the latest episodes. You can go and rate and review the show as well. And last but certainly not least, got to let you know today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Make sure to go and download the Game Time app right now, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off the sporting events, concerts, or theater events near you. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. So close were the Blackhawks to winning the slackin for Macklin sweepstakes with the top overall pick in the 2024 NHL Draft, but just wasn't destined to be like last year. It did, though, come down to the Blackhawks and the San Jose Sharks. They were the last two teams available for the number one overall pick. Fittingly, the two teams with the best odds at landing Macklin Celebrini. But the ping pong balls, the ping pong gods, the hockey gods, whatever you want to call it, ended up going in San Jose's favor. And Macklin Celebrini, a kid with some San Francisco ties, got some ties to a couple of cities, as we found out during the broadcast, will be remaining in California, very likely going to be number one overall, going to San Jose. While it didn't end up going the Blackhawks' way yesterday, though, they still walk away from the NHL Draft Lottery sitting real pretty. And as general manager Kyle Davidson put it, even though they didn't get number one, some people may think he's joking, but this is a real massive win for the Blackhawks. And I certainly agree. They're not coming out with the bell of the ball. They didn't hit that grand slam, walk-off home run, if you will, but still a pretty big victory here to, not move down to number 3 or worse, even number 4. And now having the second overall pick, it's kind of like the draft runs through Chicago a little bit because everyone knows Macklin Celebrini is going to be the number 1 overall pick here. There's no real surprise, but after that, things are kind of wide open for the Blackhawks. They have lots of options, lots of different ways that they could go with this pick, and I'll be getting into all of their options at number 2 here in just a moment. But I did want to recap the draft lottery a little bit and share some thoughts on things. Not a very intriguing draft lottery. No one really making any moves whatsoever. No crazy storylines of potentially Utah making a jump up in their first year as a franchise like some people expected. The draft lottery is always exciting because especially when you're a team that's in the mix, you want to see who's going to wind up with the number 1 overall pick. But yeah, not a whole lot of buzz or anything crazy going on in this year's lottery. The results were pretty as expected, pretty flat. San Jose winds up with the first pick. The Blackhawks, of course, get the second. Anaheim will be able to add another real good player to their already stacked prospect pool, coming away with the third pick. Columbus at number 4, Montreal at 5, Utah at 6, Ottawa at 7, Seattle at 8, Calgary at 9, and then New Jersey at 10 to round things out inside the top 10. And I also wanted to share some thoughts on a couple of statements from general manager Kyle Davidson following the results of the draft lottery. First, he didn't kind of show his hand, if you will, in terms of whether the Blackhawks could be leaning forward or defenseman with the second overall pick, as I'll talk about in just a moment as well. It's going to be interesting to see which way they go. And there are both areas of need kind of in the prospect pool at the blue line and up front still for the Blackhawks, making this an even more intriguing decision. But yeah, Davidson didn't lean one specific way on a forward or a defenseman yesterday. He said, quote, "I think we're heavy on defense. We're heavy on forward. We can rank the board accordingly and then just go with what fits best. Who is going to fit the Blackhawks the best?" Yeah, kind of just a common hockey answer there, not giving a whole lot. But that's going to be the debate for the Blackhawks up until draft day. Are they going to go with a forward at number 2, or are they going to try to add a right-handed defenseman on their blue line? Also, another notable comment from Kyle Davidson. He said, "The way we see this draft and what we're able to acquire at the draft, number 2 is a very big win," which I agree. Number 2 is, like I said, it's not a grand slam walk-off home run. It's not an overtime winner for the Blackhawks. It's still a pretty big-time victory. And also, love to hear that from Kyle Davidson, suggesting we could see the Blackhawks be active at this year's draft once again, and that shouldn't come as a surprise. Kyle Davidson has done this since taking over. What did he do at the 2022 NHL Draft? Remember that day the Blackhawks had 0 first-round picks going into it? They came away with 3. They ended up with the 7th overall pick on a trade with the Ottawa Senators for Alex DeBrincat. They also traded Kirby Dach to land Frank Nazar at number 13, along with Gavin Hayes, and they took on Peter Mrazek's contract to get back in the first round and take Sam Renzel. And then also last year, as Oliver Moore was falling, we saw some behind-the-scenes videos of Kyle Davidson trying to make moves to go and get Oliver Moore. No one was just really budging. Unfortunately, he ended up still falling in their laps at number 19, but we've seen Kyle Davidson be aggressive on the first day of the NHL draft and all throughout it as well. That's something that he's done since taking over. And given the Blackhawks' stacked amount of draft picks that they have, all the draft capital that they've amassed in his time as general manager, wouldn't be surprised to see them make another move, potentially even trade up from number 20, their second first-round selection from Tampa Bay, because the Blackhawks have 3 seconds and 2 third-round picks this year. Then they have 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and 2 fourths in 2025, along with 3 seconds in 2026. So, yeah, lots of draft capital to move up from, and it sounds like they're going to be thinking about it once again, potentially from number 20. We've seen Kyle Davidson do it in the past. Don't be surprised if he does it again. Love to hear that comment. And this is a pretty big win for the Blackhawks, even though they didn't come away with Macklin Celebrini. They're still in a really good spot. And speaking of Macklin Celebrini, did anyone else yesterday think it was a little bit weird how ESPN was handling the situation? And I just thought it was a little weird for Macklin Celebrini to be there, particularly when, look, don't get me wrong. Like I said earlier, Macklin Celebrini is going number 1 overall. We all know this, but it's just kind of been a thing in years past. Even the Blackhawks last year, they never came out and said Connor Bedard is going to be the number 1 overall pick, even though everyone and their mother knew that to be the case. It's just kind of a thing that's gone down in hockey over the years. And maybe this is a little bit of old man coming out of me here on the show, but I just thought it made for a little bit of an awkward scene for Macklin Celebrini yesterday. They were really asking him like the same questions, like, what are you feeling in your stomach? What are you feeling right now? Like, this is a 17-year-old kid, man. Just kind of let him breathe. I thought it made it a little bit weird. There was a little bit of awkwardness there, and it was kind of like, what do you really expect Macklin to say? So I don't know. It was kind of a weird decision to have him there in person, but I guess they want to be marketing him already, clearly. But yeah, just made for a little bit of a weird environment yesterday, and we've had some far bigger runaways for the number 1 overall pick not kind of be trotted out there and announced as the number 1 overall pick like they did for Macklin yesterday. So I just thought that was a little bit weird. Go and jump in the comment section right now if you kind of felt the same way. And also go and jump in the comment section and let me know your reaction to the Blackhawks not winning the Macklin Celebrini sweepstakes, but still coming away with a very good pick in the 2024 NHL draft. Let me know your feelings in the comment section. And also let me know who you think they should be taking at number 2 overall in just over a month's time. All right, there are my quick thoughts on the Blackhawks landing the 2nd overall pick. Coming up in just a moment, I'll get into my thoughts on all of the Blackhawks options like Ivan Demidov and Artyom Levshunov at number 2. But first, I got to talk to you all about Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to the next ball game that you want to attend, and I'm happy to announce here that Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets both faster and easier. Plus, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time helps take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And I personally have used Game Time for probably close to a decade. This isn't, something I'm just saying because it's an ad. No, I've really used Game Time since I was back in high school going to see the Blackhawks in their heyday at the United Center, going to see the Cubs at Wrigley Field during the summer. And I still use Game Time to this day, even when I'm traveling in different cities and want to go and catch a game, or trying to go and watch a comedy event with one of my buddies, go and see a concert. I always check Game Time first because it's the fastest, cheapest, and easiest way for you to purchase your tickets. Plus, with last-minute deals, flash deals, and zone deals, it's so easy to find and buy MLB tickets now that baseball season is about to take over. I highly recommend you all go and download the Game Time app right now, and when you do, create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off with your first purchase. Again, you can get $20 off to come see Seiya Suzuki at Wrigley Field this season. All you have to do, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Game Time. I also need to talk to you all real quick about Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish that you could handpick the best stars for your roster? Well, if you're building your talent roster, then you need Indeed, because Indeed is the only job site out there where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. So instead of spending countless hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need to use the one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all, and that is Indeed. Indeed streamlines the hiring process with powerful tools that find you match candidates in an instant. And again, I personally love Indeed because it's the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet those must-have requirements and standards. And Indeed knows that when you're growing your business, you got to make every dollar count. And according to ComScore, Indeed is the #1 job site out there worldwide, and Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest. So start hiring right now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Again, that's Indeed.com/lockedon for quality applications that meet your hiring criteria. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? Then you need Indeed. Segment 2, with the Blackhawks getting the second overall pick, it's going to be very intriguing to see which direction they wind up going, and for a couple of different reasons here, honestly. First, because the 2024 NHL Draft really is so wide open after Macklin Celebrini is expected to go #1 to San Jose, there's a lot of intriguing options. Ivan Demidov and Artyom Levshunov, though, are probably the two that have been consistently ranked near the top by most draft analysts and most draft scouts, but there isn't really any clear-cut next guy up. And also, what makes this intriguing is the Blackhawks, I think they have 2 different but very specific needs going into the first round of this year's draft, and I kind of outlined that in segment 1. I do think they want to be adding to their forward group. I still think they could use one more legit top 6 option up there, but I do believe they would probably want it to be a winger over a center. Now, if they won this year's draft lottery and they added Macklin Celebrini, you have to take him. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a center, right? Like, if you love the prospect that much, you're not going to pass on him because of a position. But I do think the Blackhawks, given they have Connor Bedard, Oliver Moore, Frank Nazar as a true center, you got Ryan Green in the pipeline, Cole Gutman even. I know he's not like a highly touted prospect and he's a little bit older at this point, but he could be a 3rd or 4th line center of the future for the Blackhawks. There's a lot of depth still down the middle for the Hawks, even though they didn't win the Macklin Celebrini sweepstakes. And I do think they'd like to add a legit guy with top 6 upside on the wing potentially, and I think that's what makes Ivan Demidov so intriguing in this year's draft. I think Cayden Lindstrom, even though he can play center, I think because of his size and his mold, not much of a playmaker, more of a pure goal scorer, I think that leads to him probably being a winger in this year's draft. So I think that's why those are 2 intriguing options for the Blackhawks. But at the same point in time, looking at the right side of their blue line, it's really thin compared to the left. You obviously got Seth Jones long-term, but other than that, Connor Murphy only has 2 years left on his deal, and he's already getting older and has been a little bit injury-plagued the past couple of seasons. So I honestly don't think he's going to be in Chicago longer than the 2 years he has left. And other than that, it's, Sam Renzel, who's still a couple of years away, and Louis Crevier, who probably isn't going to be an NHLer, if I'm being honest here. So the Blackhawks certainly need to come away with a right-handed defenseman with their first 2 or 3 picks in this year's draft. And obviously there's Artyom Levshunov, who's probably the best defenseman by most people's eyes in this year's draft, the freshman out of Michigan State. There's also, though, Zayne Perekh. Like, there's a lot of intriguing options here, and it's just going to be interesting to see which way the Blackhawks lean. Which position do they kind of want to value first? And I think, you can kind of lean either way with the question right now, but I'm going to be trying to dive into that as much as I can over the next couple of weeks and dictating which position the Blackhawks kind of need to address first at number 2 overall in this year's draft. But getting into all of these options for the Blackhawks at number 2 here, excuse me, I apologize. As I mentioned, Ivan Demidov is probably the guy with the most skill behind Macklin Celebrini in this year's class. 5'11", 170-pound winger who turned 18 back in December, had 60 points in 30 MHL games this season, 23 goals and 37 assists, a higher point per game plateau than Nikita Kucherov did in the MHL before he made the leap over to North America. The MHL, for those who don't know, it's kind of like the junior level of Russian professional hockey over there. So being a 2-point per game player is real dominance shown by Ivan Demidov. He also played in 4 KHL games with St. Petersburg in their organization this year and could possibly be a KHL regular next year, although I'll tell you in just a moment why that could not be the case. But the interesting thing about Demidov is he did suffer a knee injury in April that might have scared some franchises a little bit, but fortunately it doesn't sound like it's going to be that serious. He's not going to undergo surgery, and reports have surfaced that he should be able to get back to full health before the draft actually goes down and should be able to go about his summer as normal. So that's all good news there. But why he might not be a KHL regular next year is because he turned down an extension in Russia, which I think is going to be music to a lot of NHL teams' ears because they're not going to have to wait 3 or 4 years for him to potentially come over to North America. And it's not really as common in the modern day world of professional hockey for high-end prospects to remain over in Russia, to never come over. Not to say that it's impossible. It certainly still could happen, but most of these kids nowadays, they want to be playing in the NHL. They want to be coming over. And Demidov turning down a contract offer is kind of symbolic of that. But at the same point in time, I don't really know how that's going to sit with St. Petersburg and that organization. And I don't know if they're going to be willing to give him much of a role next year, knowing there's no future for him in that organization. So it's going to be interesting to see what winds up happening with Demidov, what league he ends up playing in. But the skill that he can play at, the high pace, he's got a really good shot, really good playmaking abilities. Can absolutely buzz around out there. Think he plays the right type of game for today's NHL. High speed, lots of skill. You can see why this kid's projected to go number 2 overall in a lot of analysts and scouts' eyes. And then there's Artyom Levshunov. These are probably the 2 who are really duking it out at the top here for the Blackhawks. The 2 most likely options, I should say, for the Blackhawks at number 2. Levshunov, a big right-handed defenseman already at 18, 6'2", 210 pounds, turned 18 back in October, and he's from Belarus. How about that? And what a freshman campaign he had for Michigan State. 35 points, 9 goals, and 26 assists in 38 games. Known as an offensive-minded defenseman who already has some good size, decent skating ability, can carry the puck through the neutral zone, walk it into the offensive zone, plays a good transition game, and is kind of the modern-day mold for an offensive defenseman in the NHL. So you can see why he could be intriguing. I expect him to be the first defenseman off the draft, whether he goes to the Blackhawks or not. First defenseman off the board in this year's draft, excuse me. I wouldn't rule out Cayden Lindstrom from going number 2 overall, though. I do believe Demidov and Levshunov are the 2 most likely options, but if it's not them, I think Cayden Lindstrom could be intriguing to the Blackhawks. 6'4", 215-pound power forward. They just don't have anyone with his size and skill in their organization. He turned 18 only back in February, so not one of the older prospects in this year's draft. 46 points, 27 goals, and 19 assists in 32 games this year with the Medicine Hat Tigers. Nearly a goal per game guy. Unfortunately, suffered an upper body injury that kept him off the ice for the majority of the season. A lot of teams are going to be curious as to what the doctors have to say about that injury. But a big-time leap for Cayden Lindstrom this past season. Only had 42 points in 61 games the year prior. Big-time production for him for the Medicine Hat Tigers this year. But he's just a true power forward. He's got a big time build, knows how to use it to his advantage, but he also skates really well for his size and plays with a super high motor. Like, this is a guy who I don't think speed is going to impact him too heavily at the NHL level. I don't expect him to be someone that flies out there, but he's someone with the abilities to make an impact on the game in all three zones because of the work ethic that he has, the motor, and he wants to make an impact on the defensive side of things. And he has a powerful shot, a big body, and knows how to go to the net. So there's a lot to like from Cayden Lindstrom if the physical all goes well. Then there's Cole Yzerman, the man for a long time that people thought was going to challenge Macklin Celebrini for the number 1 overall pick going into the season. 6 foot, 200-pound winger, turns 18, in August. One of the younger players here in this year's draft. 89 points in 57 games for the United States National Team Development Program this year. 58 goals in 57 games. This kid can absolutely light the lamp, but the question about Cole Yzerman is, what else is there to his game? What else does he have to offer? 31 assists in 57 games this year. I don't think the playmaking really jumped out as much as some people had hoped, and I'm really interested to see where he ends up going, if he still ends up going higher, if he's someone who falls a little bit down and could potentially, maybe even creep out of the top 10. Zayne Perekh, probably the defenseman that's getting the most buzz leading into the draft other than Artyom Levshunov, another right-handed defenseman the Blackhawks could consider. He's all offense though, baby. 6 foot, 180 pounds. He turned 18 back in February and had a monster year for the Saginaw Spirit. 96 points in 66 games. How about this, Blackhawks fans? 33 goals from a defenseman in 66 games this past year, along with 63 assists. He's got some unreal offensive abilities. I don't think he's going to be the first defenseman off of the board, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's the second. The other guy he seems to kind of be duking it out with in the top 10 is Anton Silayev, 6'7", 210-pound left-handed defenseman who turned 18 back in April and tallied 11 points in 63 KHL games this past season. 63 KHL games, spending most of the year as a 17-year-old. Really impressive stuff, really good experience at a young age. Curious to see where Silayev ends up going. Berkeley Catton is another name who's gotten some good attention here in the past couple of months because what he just did in the WHL this year. 5'11", 163-pound forward who turned 18 in January. 116 points in 68 games for the Spokane Chiefs this year, while wearing an A for them. 54 goals and 62 assists in 68 WHL games. Unbelievable numbers out of Berkeley Catton. And I don't want to leave out Zayne Perekh, 6'2", 190-pound left-handed defenseman who turned 18 in December, tallied 50 points in 42 games as a freshman for the University of Denver to help them win the national championship. Was also a huge factor on the blue line for the United States at the World Juniors to help them win gold. I love watching Zayne Perekh play. The Blackhawks, unfortunately, don't need a left-handed defenseman, but whoever comes away with this kid, man, I'm going to be very excited for them. I love what this kid can do. A true game breaker on the blue line, and you don't get many of those. Interested as hell to see where Zayne Perekh winds up, but those are all the players I believe are in the mix for number 2 overall, although I do believe Demidov, Levshunov, and Lindstrom are probably the big 3 of the group, but there are my thoughts on all of those guys in the mix for the Blackhawks. Coming up in just a moment, don't go anywhere because I still have to get into Lukas Reichel signing a 2-year contract extension ahead of the NHL Draft Lottery. But first, I got to talk to you all about Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime, and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low and not sure whether you or your team can pull out the victory. But that's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime and with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. And you can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and charge other players rent for your iconic properties. And you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and win tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboards together. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download the Monopoly Go app now for free on the App Store or Google Play. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, if you're still tuned into this point of today's episode, make sure to hit that like button. Comment down below as to which of the prospects that I just outlined do you believe the Blackhawks should take at number 2 overall? And also, comment down below about what I'm about to get into here in a second, your thoughts on Lukas Reichel's 2-year contract extension that was announced yesterday as well. Also, though, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So make sure to go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Segment 3, left a little bit forgotten with the 2024 NHL Draft Lottery being the creme de la creme yesterday, was the Blackhawks signing 21-year-old forward Lukas Reichel to a 2-year contract extension carrying a $1.2 million AAV through the 2025-2026 season. A true prove-it deal for the man that went 17th overall for the Blackhawks back in 2020. Reichel turns 22 years old in 9 days' time here on May 17th as the time of me recording this. And of course, he's coming off of a season filled with struggles for the Chicago Blackhawks, tallying just 16 points, 5 goals, and 11 assists in 65 games worth of action, after really thinking that Reichel was going to take that next step in his development and become a full-time NHLer for the Hawks. And, he was coming off of that very successful late season stint towards the end of the 2022-2023 campaign. He also had a very successful summer. He looked like an absolute dog during training camp back in the fall, Blackhawks fans. So much so, Lukas Reichel looked so good in training camp that I went out on a limb, and in my bold predictions episode that I dropped before the start of the regular season, one of my bold predictions was that Lukas Reichel was going to lead the Blackhawks in points this season. That's how good he looked during camp. That's how good he looked during the preseason. Obviously, that never came to fruition, and Lukas kind of made me look a little bit stupid there, but it was just such a struggle for him. Never really able to get anything going. I do feel like Andreas Athanasiou's injury early on in the season didn't really help that cause, and then Lukas really struggled to get himself back into a top 6 role, and I thought that was a nightmare for him, having him play with Entwistle and Reese Johnson, and just some of these guys who just don't mesh well with him. I never thought that was going to work well for Lukas Reichel. Then, of course, gets reassigned to the Rockford Ice Hogs late in the year after we had hoped he had kind of closed that chapter of his young career. He goes back down to Rockford, has a little bit of a successful stint there, but comes back up, and like he did a year prior, ended the season on a real high note. But now it's time for him to kind of put it all together here. And I know he's only going to be 22 years old. He's still a young kid, but it's getting to be that time. And this deal, I think, is kind of reflective of that. First, though, I do want to say I personally love it being a 2-year deal instead of just giving him a qualifying offer. I do feel like that's going to give Lukas a sense of comfort, a sense of, okay, I don't have to go and flip this thing around right here, right now. That still kind of needs to be the mentality, right? We need him to be ready to go right from the opening game next season and get off to a good start. But I think the Blackhawks giving him a 2-year deal shows that they still have confidence in him, even though things didn't go particularly well this season. $1.2 million AAV, I think that's probably as expected. I didn't think Reichel was going to be breaking the bank or anything, considering the type of numbers he just put up this year. I think 1.2 is a pretty fair prove-it deal. Can argue it any way you want, but what it really comes down to is now it's time for Lukas Reichel to put it all together. He needs to go and have a big-time summer. He needs to be working. I wonder if we're going to see him at the World Championships, getting a little bit of good experience. Maybe he didn't dominate the Calder Cup playoffs the way that I hoped, but, it's a different league, a quick adjustment on the fly for him, new line mates. I can't really hold that against him. But again, what it comes down to is Lukas Reichel, it is kind of that time for him to go out there and show that he can be the type of player that we all know he's capable of being. We've seen it in spurts. I don't want to compare it to what Philip Kurashev has done the last couple of years before breaking out this season, but it kind of feels the same. We've seen the speed. We've seen the transition game. We've seen the playmaking from Lukas Reichel. We've seen the efforts that he can make on the back check to force turnovers as well. He can be a special player. It's just about doing it and proving it night in and night out at this point in time. I like the deal by the Blackhawks, and Reichel is still only going to be an RFA when this 2-year deal expires. So it's a cheap prove-it deal for Lukas Reichel. That's the definition of it. Hopefully it gives him a little bit of confidence and comfort going into this offseason, because he needs to be a big focal point of this Blackhawks team next season to establish himself still as a part of this rebuild here, a core piece of the puzzle for the Chicago Blackhawks. Got to be a big-time summer for Lukas Reichel. Hopefully he can do this upcoming season what we were hoping he was going to do last year, solidify himself as a full-time NHLer, close that AHL chapter on his career, and have a big-time season at the NHL level for the Chicago Blackhawks. All right, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Go and give me a follow on X at JackBushman2. Make sure to also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, thank you again for tuning in. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.